Welcome back to the channel, everyone. So today's video is going to act like a little bit of a follow-up video to the one I made about 2 weeks ago, where I basically break down the current state of top tier air sim and just how unbalanced it's sort of become since the last patch. The gameplay you're seeing here in the background is the new Benelux F-16AM that you have in the French tech tree. We are going to be talking about that a little bit later in the video, but first of all, a quick recap from the last one. Ever since they added active radar-guided homing missiles to a lot of the nations in the game, the AMRAAM has clearly just sort of been consistently the best one so far, and this has resulted in the Americans just kind of wiping the floor with everyone. Now, while this is kind of boring in RB, it doesn't upset the actual team balancing too much, because in RB you can have the same nation on both teams essentially. So you can have America on team 1 and on team 2 as well. The problem is, in the simulated game mode, because there's no markers or anything like that, obviously they have to do things a little bit differently. And the way sim works is you end up having these team setups. So you have America, Britain, and Israel always versus Russia, China, and Germany. At least at top tier, that's the way matchmakers. And all the other nations can kind of sit on both sides depending on the type of match that it is. Now the issues that this can lead to is that you have all of the good planes on one side and then all of the mediocre planes on the other side. And what ends up happening is that the American team basically just ends up steamrolling the Russian team, and what follows is that the red side players one by one just slowly start leaving the match as they just don't want to put up with it. And then if you're one of the last people on the team, not only now are you still in inferior equipment, but now you're also outnumbered, and it just ends up feeling incredibly unfair as a whole. And then in contrast on the blue side as well, you end up having to sort of compete for kills with your teammates as there's less and less players to shoot at, so it ends up just not really being much fun for anyone. Now, if the comments on my last video are anything to go by, then there are a lot of people that seem to be under the impression that this is the way it's supposed to be, because it's not my fault the Russians couldn't keep up with the technology, blah, blah, blah. And if honestly Reddit's anything to go by, these are also the same people that are then complaining about the fact that the red team always seems to leave every single match and they can't find any games. But let's move on. Now, the reason for this video is because the devs have actually done something about it. Yes, about a week or two ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, they basically rebalanced a lot of the active radar-guided homing missiles. But as basically as I can put it, they reduced the maneuverability, or the slow speed maneuverability on the AMRAAM, and slightly reduced the range on it, while slightly increasing the range and maneuverability of all of the other missiles. So basically, the AMRAAM is a little bit worse, and every other missile is a little bit better. Now, I've been playing the game at top tier quite intensively for the last week or so, just so I could get a little bit of an idea and a feel for how this has actually changed the game. And I could tell you it hasn't completely balanced it all. The American team is still the better team, I would say, definitely, at least technology-wise. The Americans are always going to have a bit of a player advantage just because it's a more popular nation, and stuff like the F-15, the F-16, always going to be a little bit more popular than things like the Flanker and the Fulcrum and whatever. But generally speaking, it has improved it a little bit. And while I don't think the R-77 or the Mica or any of these other missiles are anywhere near the capability of the AMRAAM, except for maybe the AM4 and the PR-12 or something, you do definitely notice a difference. Now, the AMRAAM, I found myself at least sort of escaping them a lot more now. So if I do go cold at, let's say, slightly closer range than I should be or whatever, they don't seem to close in on me as fast as they sort of used to. And like I said, I just find myself escaping them a whole lot more now. Conversely, with the R-77 as well, I find myself sort of hitting a lot more shots, people going cold. It used to be that every single time that you fired an R-77 at someone, they basically had to sort of fly into it, right? Now, depending on the range, obviously I still wouldn't class it's like a long range missile, but if the target does go cold, it does maneuver a little bit, you will find that the R-77 does actually reach its target a lot more now, as well as it also being a lot more maneuverable. It never really used to be able to reach the 40 Gs now. It does now, or at least it gets close to it as well at certain speeds. So, like I said, the AMRAAM is technically still better, but the R-77 is at least usable now. It's definitely a dangerous missile now. You do need to actually go defensive if you're flying on the American team, whereas it used to just be well, if you had any kind of speed going, it seemed like all you had to do is just slightly turn in any kind of direction, and the missile just would fall short, basically. But it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So the R-77's boost phase is also a lot harder than that of the AMRAAM, so it gets up to its max G pull a lot quicker now, making this missile actually pretty good for like dogfights now as well, at least compared to the AMRAAM that definitely needs a couple of seconds on the burner before it sort of gets up to, let's say, maneuvering speeds. Also, on a quick side note, the mica missile is pretty damn decent now. It's still kind of on the same level as the R77, although I would say the mica's like slightly better just as a package. The R-Data/Derby missile is actually usable now. I still wouldn't consider them like good Fox 3 missiles, but they're definitely usable now, especially in dogfights. And the AAM-4 is sort of in the same league as the AMRAAM. I'd say it's a little bit less range, but it does pull a little bit harder off the rail. I would assume the PL-12s are also kind of similar to the AAM-4s, but I haven't tested them yet because they're only available on the JAF, and to be honest, I just really don't care about that plane, so... And what I've noticed in the past week of playing top tier is that this change really seems to have resonated with a lot of people. I've noticed that red team sizes have been staying a lot stronger than they have been before the patch. Even in some cases actually outnumbering the blue team. However, that doesn't last very long generally because people are always looking for US matches. However, this is something that very rarely happened before the patch, and it's happening a lot more frequently now, so that's good. It's also become a little bit more easier to find blue matches now as well when you're looking through the server browser. And overall, I think this patch has been very healthy for the game as a whole. However, we're still not at the point where I would say we have achieved something that I would call balanced. I promise we are getting to the F-16 footage in the background, but just let me talk about the flanker first because it's sort of the main plane for the red side, and if the flanker's shit, then red side is going to suffer, right? But I am getting to it. The thing is, though, is that when you play the flanker, or the SMT, it's basically any Russian plane, you can get kills, you can shoot down other planes, but you end up having to sort of outsmart your opponent, right? And the problem is I can tell you this also as a content creator, obviously I get like hunted fairly frequently as well, especially with the whole server browser thing in Sim. It makes it quite easy to find people, which is fine, right? It's a video game, like who cares? But when you're going up against opponents that, you know, they're experienced, they know what they're doing, and they're in an F-15C, the shortcomings on your aircraft do become apparent to you very quickly. The MiG-29 SMT obviously has atrocious flight performance for the battle rating. Yes, it can kind of rate around at 900 kph or whatever, but if you end up sort of in the merge with anyone who vaguely knows what they're doing in an F-16 or an F-15, you're going to very quickly notice that your plane doesn't do anything better than theirs does. And then of course the flanker with its comically bad radar, where the scan rate is so slow that I think, who was it? I think it was Squishface that said it might as well be faxing the information to you, which, to be honest, man, dude has a point. It is unbearably slow. I mean, 8 seconds might not sound like that much for a full scan, but when you're like in the heat of the moment, when you're trying to get missiles off as quick as possible, 8 seconds feels like an eternity. And then also add the fact that it doesn't have like a TWS auto tracker, so you have to basically manually control the radar and sort of tilt it in the direction that you think the target is kind of going at. And then also you need to complete 2 scans in order to IFF the thing in most cases. It's just a horrible radar in a lot of cases, like in most cases basically. And relying on the helmet mounted sight with its like 10-kilometer range really doesn't, it's just not good enough, right? So that needs to be changed. I think if they change that, I think if they just, let's just say half the time it takes for the thing to update, that would definitely be an improvement. Obviously if they stuck the radar from the SMT into it or whatever, it would be absolutely golden. I think the game would be balanced, the flanker would be absolutely fine. I'm hoping next patch we'll get something along the lines of like the J11B or something, and the whatever the Russian equivalent to that is. But until then, we have to make do. And how do we make do, you may ask? Of course, by playing Western aircraft on the red side. Now, like I said before, you can't have the same nation on both teams in Sim, so what you have to do is you have to select the nations that have blue side aircraft in them but can play on both sides. So that is France, Sweden, Italy and Japan. Japan obviously has the F-15, Italy has the Gripen, Sweden also has the Gripen, both with AMRAAMs by the way, and then obviously France has the F-16AM and the Mirage 2000-5. Now these are all fantastic aircraft. The problem is that first of all, these are all minor nations, meaning that a lot of people aren't going to have these nations at top tier. Second of all, these nations can't all be put together on the same team. So in fact, it's always that France and Sweden always gets grouped up together. Japan and Italy in most cases as well, except for the one time where Italy gets grouped up on the blue side along with France and Sweden, and Japan gets put on the red side. The most popular matchup is the one where France and Sweden get put on the red side with Japan and Italy on the blue side, meaning that the F-15J is locked out. So you have to make do with the Gripen, the Mirage 2000-5 and the F-16AM. Now out of these 3 aircraft, I would say that the F-16AM, despite everyone speedrunning the French tech tree in order to get it, is the worst choice out of the 3, and I'll explain why. The whole long-range BVR climbing up to 40,000 feet and launching at something 30 miles away or whatever is kind of started to die down now since the patch. A lot more people are getting better at notching and avoiding these kind of missiles anyway. In quotation marks, this like proper BVR combat is starting to become less effective now. Now this might change in the future as they change missiles and stuff, but at the moment, this is kind of where we're at. The second thing here is that even if the enemy team is LARPing, if they are climbing and they're doing the whole BVR thing, they are still going to be able to do it better than you because you're in the F-16 MLU variant, which is essentially the same plane that we have in the Chinese tech tree, just with AMRAAMs and the HMD. And as we know, the MLU variant is just the F-16A model, the Block 15 ADF model that we have in the US tech tree with an avionics upgrade. So meaning that, yeah, I mean, you have AMRAAMs, you have a good radar, you can do the whole BVR thing. It's just that the enemy team is still going to be better at it than you are. Like I said before, when you're playing against the Americans, a lot of the time you do spend being outnumbered. So you end up having to sort of fly low and sort of sneak around them, just basically play like a rat anyway. And both the Gripen and the Mirage are just better adapt at sort of doing that kind of playstyle, right? The Gripen's flight model was very comparable to the F-16A models anyway. In fact, I'd say it's better in a lot of cases, as well as having a very similar weapons loadout and about 27 billion countermeasures. Now, if you don't have access to the Swedish Gripen, and because say you only have France or something, and you're wondering if if you have the Mirage 2000-5 and you're wondering if it's worth going down the Benelux tree in order to get the F-16AM, I will say the AM is definitely more of a side grade to the Mirage 2000-5 rather than an upgrade. In fact, in some cases I would even say it's a bit of a downgrade, but that might be a bit of a stretch. It is still a very capable aircraft, but it just ends up being the way you have to sort of play on the red side right now, and that is the fact that you have to get in close, you have to use terrain as cover or use multipathing or something in order to get close to your opponent somehow. And the Mirage just does so much better at close range than the F-16s do at the moment anyway. Not to mention that it carries 2 more missiles as well, so your killing potential is also higher. Now, things are substantially different if you're playing on the blue side against the Reds, because of the fact that you're mainly going to be going up against R-77s. Of course, there might be 1 or 2 F-15s or 1 or 2 Italian Gripens on the Red team at that point. However, for the most part, it is going to be the shorter range R-77s that you're going to be facing, meaning that you can get a lot closer to your opponent, meaning that the AMRAAM is going to have a lot more killing potential, and you're going to end up finding that the AMRAAM is a lot more useful on that kind of team as opposed to if you're fighting an entire team that has the same weapon as you, if that makes sense. The Mirage also does a lot better on the blue team, obviously, as well. But it makes a lot more sense to play the whole range game on the blue team anyway, and obviously the AMRAAM just does a lot better at this than the Mica does. So in summary here, should you grind the F-16AM? Well, I think if you mainly play France on the blue side, yeah, I do think it's worth it. If you mainly play on red, then you're probably still better off with the Mirage. However, variety is also the spice of life, and it's an F-16, and the F-16 is cool, so it's definitely worth picking up if you don't have anything else to grind. However, if you are obviously strapped for time, there might be better options for you to spend that time on. When it comes to balancing in top tier air sim, I think we're definitely in a better spot than we were about 3 weeks ago. However, things are still very heavily skewed towards the blue side, and I think what really needs to happen is that the flanker needs to get a radar upgrade. Maybe have its search speed about halved, so instead of 8 seconds to update, it now only takes 4 seconds. I think that would solve a lot of issues and make the experience a lot better. However, ideally, obviously, we'd need a flanker with something like the SMT radar or something, but in order for that to happen, we'd need to wait for the next patch for a new aircraft to come in. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you have any suggestions on how to potentially fix top tier air sim, please put them in the comment section below. You never know who's watching. If you're interested in joining a sim-orientated Discord server, my one is obviously linked in the description as always. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.